For our time of meditation and reflection, I invite you to take 3 breaths with me, full breaths as much as you can, bringing some measure of ease to your body, relaxation, in and out. 1, in and out. 2, in and out. 3. May you receive these meditation words, allowing them and the silence and music that follows to move within you, to find some place within your body where they can settle and have their effect upon you. This is called the counting. The counting started March 15th, 2020. Days as viscous as years. Captivity is like that. We counted cases. We counted deaths. We counted toilet paper rolls and counted on one another to stay compliant, to stay apart, to stay resilient, to stay alive. When liberation finally came, way back when, for the Hebrew slaves in Egypt, it came quickly. It came so quickly, they say, that there was no time to add yeast to bread, but not so for us. For us, liberation rises and falls in stages, an errant ocean tide with deep undertows. There has been ample time to add yeast to our own bread. And now, finally, at last, some of us are able to break bread together again, to gather together in worship with less fear. But the counting continues, doesn't it? All different kinds of countings. Now we count how long it's been since we've seen each other and who and what has been lost and hopefully some of what has been gained. We count how long until the next booster, until things start feeling normal again. We count people of color and school children being killed. Or perhaps we count how long it will be until those of us still here can hear in their heart of hearts, in our heart of hearts, a voice thundering that every one of us counts, that every moment counts, every choice. The days now made joyful by spring and by reunions and music festivals, these days now made terrifying by fire and bullets and war and captivity to patriarchal rulings, these days are speeding up. Don't forget to breathe. And if you will, to count, to distinguish each day from the next, each breath from the moment to moment. Don't forget to count and to distinguish each injustice from that which will hopefully ease the ache that is growing within and among us. Let us pay attention. Let us distinguish. Let us count both the blessings of liberation that comes in stages and the dangers that we all face when we don't keep focus on how far we have yet to travel together toward freedom. The last time I was here with you in person was December 2019. It was a holiday service. So much has happened since then. The pandemic and all the societal discord around responses to it, the supply chain issues, the ongoing racial injustices, exacerbated by economic inequities, environmental horrors, and wars, both far away and here within our own nation, the battlefield being that of Black and brown bodies and women's bodies and queer and non-binary and trans bodies and children's bodies. There has been untold suffering in the world and in our communities since we last met. And that doesn't even address those struggles that are private, that are held within the secret chambers of our hearts and of our minds, those things that we don't express out loud. There's been a lot going on. The good news is if you're still here, clearly you've found a way to adjust somehow, at least partially learned how to roll with the punches. At best, that is what human beings do. We adjust. What was unthinkable becomes the new normal relatively quickly. But as much as that tendency to adjust has served evolutionary advantage over the millennia, it also means that we are quick to minimize, to overlook the presence and ongoing effects of chronic grief and trauma and fear. The presence and ongoing effects of injustices, of situations that have a proven tendency to make human beings feel trapped and disempowered and outnumbered and hopeless. Many of us are trying really, really hard to tune out those feelings because so much is still being thrown at us. Because every day our attention is caught up in something else, something more immediate, something more horrifying, more crucial, because we're just exhausted. We're just exhausted. Many of us are tuning out to the fuller reality of these in-between days, perhaps because the self-soothing and coping mechanisms we're drawn to are numbing. They're more numbing than they are empowering or engaging. And meanwhile, time goes on all too swiftly. As much as it took to get used to isolation, to get used to distancing and to these masks and to testing and all of that, many of us are now experiencing what I call emotional whiplash. The inability to just keep up with things, the inability to be fully present, to feel fully present, even to the good things, even to the joyful things, because the horrible things just feel too massive. But there are good and joyful things that happen every single day. And the question is, are we able to perceive them? Are we able to take them in and allow them to soothe us, to comfort us, to strengthen us? The inability to recognize the resources and strengths within and among us is widespread. As it turns out, that really is a common and classic trauma response. And what I want to share with you today is a practice, a tool from within the Jewish tradition that I have found really helpful as I seek to deal with my own emotional whiplash. There are a lot of things I'm trying to do in order to stay present to this time in which we live. But today I want to share with you a particular one. It has to do with paying attention over the course of 7 weeks, 49 days exactly, to the details of two ancient stories, the story of Passover, when slavery gave way to liberation, and the story of what was said to have happened 49 days later when Moses brought down the commandments from the mountaintop. Commandments being the standards or values by which the newly liberated people would be able over time to transform themselves into a free people. In a nutshell, Passover is a story of bondage, of waiting for liberation, and after its arrival, of the chaos and confusion that can arise in the in-between days, that liminal space in between liberation and freedom. So in the 49 days between the first story and the second, there's an invitation to reflect on the ways in which we ourselves, here and now today, may be constricted, may be in bondage, may be living lives that are small and fearful, the ways in which we might consciously or inadvertently be causing others to live that way. Each year at Passover Seders all over the world, collective attention is given to misguided or corrupt systems of power, and not just the ancient ones. So these 49 days of counting, of which today is the 43rd, they are counted as a daily reminder to do whatever we can do to keep moving forward together towards freedom. Because that is an ongoing story. Freedom is an ongoing story. Liberation is usually connected to a particular event, but freedom, boy, that's an ongoing story. Whether we're talking about modern or ancient slavery or plagues or violence or anything else, we are clearly, collectively not yet free. So by way of background, originally the annual counting of these 49 days was practical because it was the amount of time between the wheat harvest and the barley harvest. So people counted those days in order to know when to harvest. But at some point, another connection was made linking that agricultural time frame to those two religious stories. It's unclear exactly when or how or why that happened, but it is possible to notice the long-term effect that doing so has had and continues to have on a people who have endured much trauma and continue to be targeted. Paying attention to those stories, taking the time to glean lessons from them each day, even in the midst of new traumas, has been found to generate a certain level of safety and coherence and resilience within each generation. To me, that seems highly relevant because we're all dealing with some form of trauma. Right now, we are all yearning for safety and coherence and resilience in these uncertain circumstances. It's become clear to most of us that it is indeed time to let go of old, outdated habits and ways of being, individually and societally. It's time to learn how to be leaders and how to support worthy leaders, how to live together and move forward together as a global community on this aching planet. So as I engaged with this spiritual practice this year, this sacred practice of counting the in-between days, I was surprised to find so much wisdom and inspiration in these ancient stories. They prompted me to consider in which ways I feel constricted, or in which ways I may be constricting others. What it is I need to leave behind, what it is I'm still carrying, and whether or not that's useful. Where I am, where I'm going, who's beside me, who isn't, why not. What is asked of me and of human beings in general, who and what can I or we count on or offer one another? What are our shared standards and values? What common values need to be identified and solidified among us for everyone's sake, for the sake of collective freedom? So the practice of counting the days in between can be done in lots of different ways. It can be as simple as noticing the date and saying, wow, today is the 7th week and it's the 43rd day. We are in the home stretch. And then maybe we can take time to reflect on the fluidity or the viscosity of time, or maybe we can recite a prayer or a blessing or express gratitude or set an intention. Another way to engage with this practice, what's a little bit more involved, is to take time each day to think about the quality or attribute or action traditionally associated with each of those 7 weeks and with each of the 7 days within each of those 7 weeks, to distinguish them from one another, to be curious about them, about the insights that they can generate. So as a visual learner and thinker, I was drawn to the latter invitation, the more complicated invitation, because it comes with a diagram. There's the diagram. So those here might want to take a look at the insert in the order of service. It's a little bit easier to read, and I'm also going to do my best to describe the diagram in a little while. But in the meantime, I want to say that in the Jewish mystical tradition, this diagram has come to be called the tree of life. So imagine roots at the bottom and leaves and fruit up top, or maybe even the other way around. It is a little bit like the Hindu chakra system that recognizes 7 qualities or energy points, and usually visualized on the human body, on the spine. Sacrum at the bottom, crown of head at the top. It's very similar to that, but there are some differences. This diagram includes more qualities or energy points, usually 10 or 11. And instead of having them placed in a vertical, all on the spine, on the central pillar, it places them on 3 pillars, left, right, and center, reinforcing the idea that life really is a balancing act between conflicting forces. And the goal is to find our way to that balanced central place. We often find ourselves caught up, don't we, in this or that thinking, focusing on the past or on the future, being too harsh or too lax, too right brain, too left brain. At the most basic level, we may remember to breathe in fully, but we often neglect to let it all out, to say nothing of savoring the space between our breaths, between our heartbeats. It's all too easy to get stuck in extremes, in binaries, to become polarized and in the process disconnected from the bigger picture, from the other possibilities. So what excites me about this system of thinking about things is that it encourages paying attention to what may be out of whack, what may be out of balance within us and among us, in our relationships, our communities, our institutions, so that we can try to do something about it, so we can stay engaged and hopeful. So for those who may not be able to see the image, I'm going to quickly describe it. The quality of compassion and loving kindness is placed on the right pillar, discipline boundaries on the left. Below that in the center is truth or beauty, situated at the heart. Moving further down, we find instinct, habit, and passions represented on the right. Those are the things that we do automatically without thinking. And right across from that, on the same level, seeking balance, is meaning-making. The drive to piece things together intellectually and logically and to communicate what we discover. That's shown on the left side. Further down on the central pillar is what's called the foundation, right below the heart. And it's called the foundation because it's the foundation of the self and the ego. It has to do with our sense of self, our personality, our psychology, and more than that, our ability or inability to move with confidence and hope through this world. Our ability to feel empowered to roll with the punches. A lot of us are having a lot of trouble in that area of our lives right now. At the very bottom on the central pillar, the least abstract of all of these qualities is our physical reality. This is our flesh and blood bodies, our senses. In Jewish tradition, this is where the feminine aspect of the divine is believed to become accessible to us through our day-to-day experiences, how critical our lived experiences are. Please take another deep breath and know there will not be a test on this. But if you were able to see the diagram, you may be wondering why I started with compassion when there are actually 3 other points above that, 3 other attributes above it. And the reason is because those lower 7, and actually the lower 4 mostly, are the ones that we mortals are most familiar with. They keep us pretty busy. They have to do with the effects of time and gravity on our bodies. They have to do with the need to overcome traumas, the need to harmonize our interpersonal relationships, to control our instincts, to connect with truth, and to act from compassion. All of these have given shape to multi-million-dollar health and beauty and self-help and psychiatric industries. It is rare for human beings to get to the point where we can focus our energies on the qualities that are, for lack of better terminology, higher up on the tree, more abstract, more transcendent, like understanding and wisdom and unitive consciousness. These tend to be attributed mostly to saints and bodhisattvas or people who imbibe in edibles. For many of us, it can be frustrating to face that truth or realization, to try to liberate ourselves from both the basic needs or inclinations and the traumas that keep us rooted in the past or fearful of the future, that keep us from feeling empowered in the present. So this diagram, this system, implies that we have to face that personal truth before we can grow up and out of the past, before we can grow into what it's going to take to live in harmony and balance in these bodies and with one another, enjoying the fruits of freedom together. So today, as I said, is the 7th week and the 43rd day of this practice of counting. Now, the 7th week focuses on the most basic human experience, that of being embodied, represented by the bottommost circle where the roots are, being of flesh and blood and bone, subject to time and gravity and all sorts of other painful injustices. Because of this week's focus, I found myself paying attention to my own physical experience, remembering that the most primal, basic human needs, recognized in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, are the lowest 2. The need for food and drink and shelter and safety. I found myself humbled by the generosity not only of this earth, but of all those known and unknown, seen and unseen, who have made it possible for me to be here today, to not be in want of these most basic human needs, and I recognize the privilege inherent in that truth as well. So today is the 43rd day. And the 43rd day draws attention to the attribute of compassion on the right pillar. Expansive compassion, which I'm realizing is such an undervalued, misunderstood force in this world. So here's a true story. This past week, I woke up to an email from a woman who had found me in a ditch on the side of a deserted road in upstate New York 11 years ago. I'd been riding my bicycle and had heat stroke, got off my bike, crawled into a ditch because there was some shade there and just couldn't move, and there were no people far and wide. She drove up in her truck, she found me, she picked me up, she took my bike, put it in the back of the truck, and drove me to my mother's house where I drank multiple pitchers of water with electrolytes in it, and she waited to see if I would recover, which I did slowly. And we spent the afternoon together. And before she left, I gave her my card, my gratitude and my card. So it turns out that all these years, she held on to that card and she remembered it. She remembered that day. And this week, she reached out to me to let me know that she had felt blessed by that day, by that afternoon spent together. So my life, my physical well-being, my safety was endangered that day, and she was the one to bring me to safety. Her compassion saved me. But the fruit for me in all of this is that according to that unexpected email 11 years later, she was the one who had all these years felt blessed by that encounter. I moved on. I remembered it for a while, but then I moved on with my life. She held on to that moment and felt blessed by that encounter. So I share this story because it's true and because it's a perfect example of how this practice of reaching past the chaos and confusion and uncertainty of these in-between days, paying attention to the ways in which these various energies and qualities are expressed within and among us, how this practice can open our hearts and our minds to the present moment and to one another, to exactly where we are, which is always a place ripe with opportunities for meaning making, for awe and gratitude and wonder and connection and the discipline of compassion. Keeping watch for those who are, in one way or another, for one reason or another, on the side of the road. So no mention of compassion can be made without acknowledging that the word itself is based upon the reality of suffering. We are not yet free. Compassion is what rises within us when we feel in our bodies the reality of suffering, the uncertainty and chaos and loss that holds others, that holds us all in bondage. Compassion is active when we feel in our bodies that something is out of whack, something is out of balance, like when I read the names of those children and those teachers. We felt that in our bodies, didn't we? Can I see hands? Yeah. When we feel that something is out of balance and we are moved to do something about it. When we discern what not to adjust to, and there is a lot. There's always something we can do, no matter the ravages of time and gravity and injustice. So in closing, I invite you to join me in bringing curiosity to all of this. Bring curiosity to all of this, at least for today, this 43rd day of the 49 days of counting the fluidity and viscosity of time as marked by these two ancient stories. Bring curiosity to your own roots. May the soil supporting them be fertile soil, inspiring confidence and hope. May they find their way to the deepest well. Bring curiosity to your trunk, both solid and flexible in the face of life's storms. May you feel pulsing at its center the truth of your own worth and agency. Bring curiosity to your branches, reaching upward and outward, creating shelter, providing safety and nourishment for far more than you may ever know. You may get an email in 11 years. Who knows? Pay attention to the roots, trunk, and branches, and the fruits of this country as well. Be present to all of it. Distinguish between the energies at play as much as possible. Be attentive to who we are, where we are, how we got here, and who's not here, and why. And what it's going to take to liberate ourselves, all of us, from whatever might be keeping us from experiencing ourselves and one another as accompanied and embedded in incredibly complex systems within which we have agency. We still have agency. Moment to moment, we have choice. We have the ability to check in with ourselves and each other, our relationships, our communities, our institutions, to distinguish the forces at play, to save one another. We have it within us to uplift one another so that we are strengthened in our ability to know and trust that the journey from liberation to freedom, however long it may take, is a worthwhile one. And it must be a collective one. So may it be. Thank you.